In Vlog 9, we're going to be focusing on the concept of reality, its historical notion throughout the history of philosophy, and how we can conceptualize it today if we include our own consciousness, subjectivity, into the equation. So the most real or the most true in philosophy, as mentioned in a previous vlog, is one of the most important aims and one of the most important ideas in philosophy. If we think about the most real or the most true as a historical notion that's important for human subjects, broadly speaking, in the ancient world, there was a much stronger tendency to view the most real or the most true as something supernatural, like God or heaven or some variety of a supernatural conception. The supernatural world gained all sorts of positive and negative connotations and certainly influenced human action and perception of the world. In the modern world, there is a broad-scale, very general transition towards disbelief in the supernatural and instead belief in the natural. In the modern world, there is a far greater tendency for a more secular, humanistic perspective which sees the most real or the most true in terms of physical laws, for example, or evolutionary principles, for example. These two ways of seeing the most real or the most true could be framed within a scientific ontology like Newtonian epistemology or Darwinian epistemology. Now, in both these large, broad conceptions of the most real or the most true, both had extreme effects on human action. In the ancient world, with conceptions of the supernatural, you would have large projects, large institutions, which were explicitly dedicated towards this most real, most true. Temples, huge ceremonies, ritual offerings, annual celebrations. In the same way, the modern world develops huge projects dedicated to understanding nature, understanding ourselves. You could frame large-scale physics experiments, or you could frame even large-scale self-help or self-development workshops along these lines. When you include historical subjects into the equation, however, the most real or the most true gains a different dimensionality. We have to include the fact that subjects are positing or presupposing this most real or this most true dimension of reality. When we include the real truth of human reality, we have to consider that the real is inclusive of both the ancient positing, the modern positing, and all different forms of positing and the way they affect human action. In this sense, we have to temporalize the real truth. We have to temporalize the real truth in the sense that the real truth is not some naive, eternal substance, some eternal substance which doesn't change and doesn't depend on the very positing of human subjects. This allows us to bring in psychoanalysis, which we could explain on a very minimal level simply as including a reflectivity into our understanding of the real truth. In psychoanalysis, there is no eternal substance pre-existing subjective positing, there is only what the subject is putting there, and thus the real truth becomes much more empty, much more like a nothingness or a void. Within this nothingness or void, forms or figures of eternal substance may appear, like a supernatural world, or like physical laws, which may have some use value or may have some utility in an analysis of historical substance, whether that be natural substance or whether that be human belief systems and human action. In this sense, when we think about approaching the real, we are thinking about approaching a real which is inclusive of human desires and dreams. What does the history of human action, what does the history of human positing of the real truth tell us about humans' own desires and dreams? For example, when we think about the real or the most true as heaven or God, does this signify that we have some unconscious urge to be in a heavenly state, or to be in some sort of synthesis or some sort of union with a supernatural being who would take care of us? Or, alternatively, in the scientific conception, Do we have some sort of unconscious drive to have a absolute control over nature as our other? Do we have some sort of unconscious desire to totally sublimate nature within our minds? Inclusive of the real as a void, we again here set up a division between temporal substance, things like physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, geology, things which change and move across time, or as time, and the atemporal void, the void which never changes, where figures and forms in their virtual constitution come to structure or overdetermine our action in history. In this sense, we're invited on a very much subjectively engaged path to discovering the real truth. To be specific, we're asked to traverse the fantasy. What it means to traverse the fantasy is to traverse any notion of an eternal substance which would guarantee human action and human positing. There is no other, whether that be a supernatural other or a natural other, which would guarantee the consistency of our knowledge. God, heaven, the laws of physics, even Darwinian evolution, these are all constructs of the human mind embedded within historical processes, which are subject to change. In 100 years, in 500 years, in who knows how many years, we have no idea what will become of these notions and the real and the truth of their meaning for conscious observers. The real truth could be totally other, in other words. What this means pragmatically for us right now, here in the present moment, is that we should be very cautious and very hesitant to accept any notion of an eternal substance, which would in some sense eradicate the real truth as an antagonism or an obstacle. There is no permanent substance which we could comfortably ground our positing in relationship to. Instead, we may grow the most by owning the antagonism and the obstacle. This is perhaps one of the most important lessons of becoming a dialectical thinker. Instead of believing absolutely in, say, physical laws or Darwinian processes or even God or heaven, instead we may put all of these different real truths into a type of antagonistic relationship with one another. Perhaps in this process we could even discover something totally new. I hope that this approach to understanding the real, both as a historical phenomenon and in our present reality, was useful for you and helped you to conceptualize the frontier of contemporary philosophy. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.